Hello and welcome to this, the fourth video in a series of 5 on middle pair. My name is Ben Hales. This is brought to you by Postfloppoker.com, and today we're going to be talking about how stack to pot ratio affects the way we play middle pair. We've talked about equity and the importance of calculation of our equity. It's very much linked when we're dealing with SPR. We're dealing with the two things together. Post-flop situation we dealt with last time. If we can grasp all of these three concepts and be thinking about them as we play middle pair, then we're going to do really well. We're going to be thinking about the right things, coming up with the right solutions. So let's press on and talk about stack to pot ratio. It would be really helpful if you already understand and are familiar with calculating stack to pot ratio. It is the ratio between the effective stack, so how many chips can you win or lose left in the stacks, with the effective pot size. You must be able to calculate those two numbers in order to clash them together and work out the stack to pot ratio. It's as important post flop as understanding your big blind, number of big blinds you have, or your M value pre-flop. So you'll all be familiar with those measurements pre-flop, but stack to pot ratio is just as important for when you're playing post-flop. Now, the table in front of you shows how committed you're probably going to be with middle pair. It will depend on your equity, and the precise SPR. But as you can see, generally speaking, with a really low SPR of 0, 1, and probably 2, you just have to commit to middle pair. There's no escape at that point. The number of chips in the middle plus the equity you've got are going to mean you've got the right odds to gamble, regardless of what the betting is. It's just a simple maths thing. If the SPR is 3, then it may be a bit more marginal. There may be spots where you don't want to commit all your money. It starts to become a bit more of a yellow zone, and that extends when it's 4, 5, and 6. There may still be times when the SPR is higher, when the betting line you take forces you into a point of commitment. That point of commitment is important because in your thinking, you can in some ways then throw away all of the hands that are beating you. So your focus on how to play the hand is against the part of the range in your opponent's hands that you are already beating at this point. So it'll include bottom pair, it'll include all drawing hands, all air. And what's your equity against those hands? Because if he's got us beaten already, we're going to go broke, right? Because the opponent's probably going to be betting enough to get all the chips in at some point, and it doesn't matter what line we take. We've decided we're committed, so there's really no point spending too much time worrying about the chips that you're going to lose in that spot. It's really important to focus in on the hands where we can make a difference to our profit and loss. If we're beating our opponent, sometimes we want to reel them in. If our equity against that part of his range is 80% plus, we don't want to just be going all in and forcing a fold. We want to be getting smaller chunk bets in and reeling him in. If our equity against that part of his range is lower, it's like 60%, then usually an all-in is going to be smarter because we're quite happy if he folds, because then we get the free chips and we've not got to gamble and face the possibility of losing 40% of the time. So, in some ways, the really low SPRs make an additional calculation necessary, and that's what's my equity, my hand equity, against only the part of the range in my opponent's hands that I'm currently beating. I hope you get that. On the chart, you'll notice all the higher SPRs we're not ever going to commit to when we're deeper stacked, unless our hand improves on the turn or the river card. So just a couple of slides: low SPR spots and then higher SPR spots. Plan your betting line in advance. Absolutely critical. Make sure that before you make a continuation bet, or you make whatever decision you make, you're thinking about how you're going to react to all the possible bets that could come next. Always be thinking at least one step ahead. In terms of bet sizing, be thinking about, okay, am I going to go with a 3-chunk bet flop turn river, or am I going to go just bet the flop and make sure I can get my chips in on the turn? The SPR will help you to form that betting line. If it's a really low SPR, you'll be looking at 1 or 2 chunks. If it's a bit higher, 3 or 4, then there's more options available for you. See betting and folding to resistance. So if you get raised at the flop stage, you may still have the opportunity to fold. And this is where understanding your commitment before you make that C bet is important. Because if you C bet and you've got X% of your stack in there, you're just not going to be able to justify folding to the check raise, especially if there's drawing hands in his range. So it's a really difficult balance. Know what you're going to do in advance. Sometimes it will commit you. Sometimes you just have to run with it and say, well, I just got myself in a spot where I couldn't find a better line. That's okay. That is okay. Sometimes it is absolutely forced. Try and understand your equity against your opponent's range. Understanding how your SPR affects you is all very well, but if you don't understand your equity at the same time, you can't put the two things together. And it's a really important thing that you're constantly thinking about equity and thinking about SPR. Aggressive lines are available to you in low SPR spots. I recommend you only take them when you're able to put your opponent in a difficult spot with a large percentage of his hand range. If your opponent is just going to fold out his really weak hands and call with all of his other hands, then you're not really achieving too much by being really aggressive. You may as well check call or take a different line. But there are spots where it makes sense to, say, check raise all in. If you think your opponent's going to call you off with some hands that he shouldn't and fold some hands that he shouldn't, then you're giving him a headache and you're making him make mistakes, which is what we're trying to do. So, aggressive lines not normal when you're holding middle pair, but definitely you can think about utilizing them when, SPR's sort of 3, 4 could be a decent play to get your chips in first, force your opponent into a difficult choice. And the bottom point there, fairly obviously, low SPRs are good for middle pair. They're good for any marginal made hand because they make the hand, they give the hand more possibility to get to a showdown and utilize the fairly strong equity that they have at the flop, negating the disadvantage of having to play a tough hand through turn and river. Okay, final slide on medium and high SPR spots. Here we're definitely going to be wanting to think more about pot control. As in the previous slide, plan in advance. Make sure you're thinking one move ahead at least. That's just utterly essential. In any turn-based strategy game, you've got to plan a few moves ahead. Fold to most raises. Be prepared to check a street. That's what your pot control is. Try not to build a huge pot by keeping your sizing modest. I've not talked about bet sizing too much in this series of videos. You don't need to do anything particularly different when you're holding middle pair, but because we have this general desire to keep the pot smaller, I would just stick to these sorts of sizings. That they should be around what you normally bet anyway, but I wouldn't go on the high side. If I'm going to go anywhere, I'd go on the low side with most of my betting holding middle pair. And the final point, high SPRs are not ideal for middle pair. We said that low SPRs are decent, but high SPRs are not ideal. The reason is, of course, that it's tricky to play a marginal made hand on turn and river, whereas your opponent may know far better where he's at in the hand, and he's therefore able to exploit you and make you make mistakes more easily than the other way around. So that's why middle pair is a bit trickier for cash game players and deep stack tournament situations. We're going to look at some tough spots in the next video, which is the final one, and it's going to put into practice some of the things we've been talking about equity, about post-flop situation, and about SPR. So I look forward to rejoining you for the final video. I am capable of short ones. This was Ben Hales signing out.